Welcome, everyone. So we're going live today with Codi Peterson. So I'm very honored and privileged to have Dr. Codi Peterson on my Chip Talk show today. We're going to have a good in-depth conversation about the endocannabinoid system and about ancillary things. So Cody is a practicing pediatric pharmacist, and if you're on LinkedIn, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you likely know who Cody is. He's very loud and vocal on LinkedIn about the endocannabinoid system. So I wanted to have him on here and compliment him on his bravery, but also just get his perspective on some things and have us all get to know Cody a little bit better. So welcome, Cody. Glad to have you.
Well, good morning, Chip, and good morning, Internet. I'm glad to be here. I'd love to talk about endocannabinoid system and my favorite herbal medicine, cannabis.
Very, very cool. Well, do we want to start off? And do you want to give us a little bit of background about? I know you're formally educated as a PhD, but then you decided to go back and get a little extra education. So that must have been an inflection, and there must be a story there. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm a PharmD actually, so practicing pharmacist, and still to this day I practice pediatrics in Southern California. But in college, as a young pharmacy student, I developed an affinity for this plant and learned how to make edibles out of it. We were doing it with some regularity in the house that I was living in. And unfortunately, at that very time, my girlfriend at the time, her grandmother was passing of pancreatic cancer and was really struggling with the medicines that they were giving her, the lorazepam and morphine that is a common cocktail in end of life care, was really hard on her, and she wasn't enjoying life. This was a woman of the 50s and 60s, but she remembered back into her 20s and said, I think that marijuana could help me. So she requested marijuana from her granddaughter, who happened to be dating this or young pharmacist. And I was like, yeah, we'll cook her up a cake. So we did that. And I expected, I hoped it helped. But what we found and what we ended up getting was this tremendous benefit for Granny, who she ended up having, sort of coming to, not requiring any of her pain or sedation medicines that day. She had a full meal, first time in weeks. And she called her grandchildren and her children on the phone. And this is after just a big old slice. We don't know how many milligrams. We weren't that advanced at the time. But it was very heartfelt. The family was crying. It was a very powerful experience. I wasn't there, but I got the secondhand account. And that, I'm going to say, planted the seed and made me realize that, wow, there's something medicinal here. And of course, I had gained probably self-treating my ADHD and things of that nature using cannabis throughout college. But, that really stuck with me. And then fast forward all the way to 2019. I'm working a pediatric hospital job, which I do. I'm an emergency department pharmacist, and the company I'm working for announces that they're going to start offering tuition reimbursement. Of course, I have zero interest in this because I've already taken out a bunch of student debt, like a day late, $1 short, and I didn't think anything of it. But serendipitously, that very same day, my best friend from those college years, buddy who made those brownies and cakes with me, just out of the blue calls me and says, "Hey, I'm driving down the highway here," and he lives in DC, here in Baltimore, and I look up and there's a sign, Masters in Medical Cannabis. And I thought of you immediately. Same day, Chip. And so, that there began the first ball to fall. And eventually I ended up going back to the University of Maryland and obtaining my MS in medical cannabis science and therapeutics from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy / UMB. But the point is I continued my education into cannabis. And during that time, I've really decided that education is what I like to do, and I'm going to do it vocally, and I'm going to do it publicly. So I post every day. Hopefully you see me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram as well. I'm sort of shouting from the rafters, though. So if you haven't heard from me yet, tell me what topic you need to hear about for you to hear me.
And if you don't follow Cody on LinkedIn or on any of the other platforms, do, because he puts out very good, relevant, important information. Even if if you're it doesn't matter if you're a PhD or a bud tender, you're going to really benefit from what Cody puts out. So great information. Interestingly, in your so compare and contrast between the pharmaceutical program that you went through, the PhD level program, and the master's level program on the endocannabinoid system. Did you get anything in your pharmacy program at all on the endocannabinoid system?
So 2007 to 2013 is when I went to pharmacy school.
Okay.
It was a 6-year program, and I heard the endocannabinoid system literally 0 times.
Yeah.
Now, my colleagues who managed to get into the highly desirable elective, my peers, I should say, they were able to hear about the ECS for a moment in a lecture. Of course, what class do you think that was, Chip?
Yeah, it was some quick overview 1 hour class, likely.
Drugs of abuse.
Drugs of abuse. Yeah.
Drugs of abuse. And so, we're talking about addictive marijuana. So now we need to talk about this master regulatory system that it just so happens to interact with. But what's crazy is we should have learned about the endocannabinoid system when we learned about NSAIDs. We should have learned it when we learned about allergy medicines. We should have learned about it when we learned about inflammation. We should have learned about it when we learned about lipid metabolism, because there are drugs in each one of those spaces that are ancillarily touching this very same system. But that didn't happen. Now, of course, I go to University of Maryland with a focus on medical cannabis, and we talked about the system, relatively regularly. But even there, it's we're trying to service a lot of different patients. So getting to the biochemistry nitty gritty, which I know you dig and I dig, but not for everyone. Even that was relatively limited. So for anyone who's interested in learning about the endocannabinoid system, the best place to go is PubMed. And you go and you just dive into the literature and you start developing your own knowledge set. This is an evolving field, and there's plenty of opportunity and need for educators and the educated in basically every space.
Yeah, and the cool thing for, let's say, people like me, lay people, is that because there is no, PhD level program here, I can kind of be as much of an expert as, Dr. Joe or PhD Bill, which is an opportunity. I have to do that professionally, and I'm not trained like you guys. But again, anybody can dive in and understand, let's say, the knowledge of the endocannabinoid system. It does, in order for me to do it, I mean, I've had to kind of, I've had to train myself about 6 levels down as I'm reading professional papers. I don't understand half the words in them, when I first started off, right? But, PubMed has lots of information on the system. It's a great place. And, if you don't want to go there, just literally follow Cody or, follow some of the others of us who are constantly posting, PubMed information and kind of deciphering that for you. Cody does a great job of that. In fact, you're doing your own graphics now, which I thought was kind of cool.
Well, yeah, I do some of my own graphics. I do some of it. A lot of it I pull from PubMed and manipulate the graphics provided by these great authors. There's a lot of work that goes into developing, writing, and publishing these papers. So you'll notice on all my posts, whether it's a graphic or not, I'll cite the authors. Like I took this from the authors. I borrowed their ideas. They stimulated the conversation, and I want people to go check out those papers as well, because I don't have all the answers, nor do I have the time to sit on LinkedIn and type out the full explanation of this paper. But I'm finding interesting images and graphics, sharing them, manipulating them to try to make them more digestible. Sometimes I do my own. A lot of the times I'm sort of pulling from stuff that's published right there and cited in my work.
Cool. Just quick on your master's program at University of Maryland, did you go through that? Was Mike Hennessy or Naomi Warwick Brown in your
Naomi was in my class.
Okay. So Naomi works for the regulatory here in Oklahoma. So so I know Naomi from the regulatory, which is kind of cool. And she's doing a good job of kind of helping the regulatory, kind of bridge with professional education, which is good. So that University of Maryland's putting out some good folks, minting some good students.
Yeah, I totally agree. But we do have an industry that needs to be open-minded and ready to elevate these folks and elevate the science behind what we're doing. Um, we just need have a long way to go to sort of, being, what do I want to say, unbiased, and being advocates, and trying to make progress beyond just access to the plant. My personal mission is trying to integrate healthcare professionals, namely pharmacists, but all healthcare professionals, more deeply into the medical cannabis model. Because right now, if you look at states, I just posted on LinkedIn last night, you'll see uh, states' medical program get dries up immediately when recreational comes. So this
Yes.
says two things to me. This says, one, the burden of the medical card and is not worth the cost associated with it, and that we're not providing value as healthcare professionals in the current model. If we were, people would continue to spend their money on our services. But instead, if you look at Michigan, as when adult use turned online, we had a rapid descent. And now basically there is only a handful of millions of dollars being spent on medical cannabis, whilst adult use cannabis is 100 million or something to that effect. And so, I mean, it's a sad situation because there's such a need. There's so many people who would benefit from a highly trained healthcare professional to discuss their medical needs. But the thing is we just don't exist.
Yep.
And for many reasons, one of them might be fear of coming out of the green closet and putting yourself out there. But the other side is training. We're not really trained about this plant. We don't feel informed, whether it's pharmacists, physicians, or nurses. And I'm glad to be part of that change, because it's time that we are informed.
Yeah, no, and I think you're boy preaching to the choir, with me. But how do you see? Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna all kind of kumbaya, but how do you see? So, in your opinion, like, how do we fix this? And I completely agree with you. We've got kind of the, let's say, professional pharmaceutical world that sits in one corner, and then we've got kind of, let's say, the complete natural products, including cannabis, that sits in the other corner. Are there ways that you're seeing, like, is there regulation that we could do? Are there things that we can do to bridge that divide? Or do you see that maybe Schedule 3, happening around Schedule 3?
Yeah. So education, right? So how do we fix this? Education. We need to get pharmacy students, medical students, nursing students exposed to this information and exposed to the idea that cannabis is medicine and can be medicine. Of course, it can also be a drug of abuse, but that's not really a problem for all these other substances. For example, I give fentanyl to children every day at the hospital. It's medicine. Of
Yeah.
course, people die every day in America from fentanyl. So, and that's a drug of abuse. So we can do the same. But right now we're framing, as I mentioned in my own education, just this drug of abuse category. And that's nonsense. So we need to expose our students. That's the best way to make lasting change in healthcare. In order to do that, you're asking about regulatory. I don't have the answer per se, but I do think what you mentioned, Schedule 3, which is Health and Human Services coming to the government saying, hey, we believe that even though marijuana is addicting, that it shouldn't be Schedule 1, which means no medical use and addicting. They say it should be Schedule 3. For reference, Schedule 3 and other Schedule 3 substances include ketamine,
Hmm.
include anabolic steroids.
Hmm.
And Schedule 4, actually less restricted than where they're proposing marijuana would be, is where you would find drugs like Xanax, and Ativan and Klonopin, and these sedatives. So in Schedule 3, even though I don't believe it belongs there, and I'm more of a deschedule person, I do think it's interesting what that sets in motion. Because on day one, I believe nothing will change, Chip. I believe everything changes except for chatter. That people are, we got venture capitalists talking, and we've got healthcare professionals talking. And I think as you go out a few years, you could get to a point where either an isolate medicine, or a new cannabinoid based medicine could hit the market, whether it's botanical or not. And at that point, if it is a Schedule 3 substance, they take it through the approval process. Now that moves into pharmacies. It doesn't go into dispensaries. It doesn't come through the traditional state markets, which hopefully will be preserved under the new proposed law. But it comes to pharmacies. And at that point, the old pharmacists who've been dragging their feet don't get a choice anymore. We have to understand the medicine. We have to be able to dispense it. We have to know what it's named, how many milligrams. Like all of a sudden, the education comes, and that I know will spark some interest from a lot of the hesitant and resistant healthcare professionals. Same thing on the doctorly side, like, oh, they've got a treatment with MS, and it turns out this cannabinoid medicine is really good for MS. We're going to see a lot more doctors sort of come to Jesus, so to speak. And I'm excited for that time. I'm here for it. Y'all have questions, call me. But I do think that's going to be a slow change.
Okay. It's interesting. I'm completely almost opposite. I think we've been kind of queued up in this war between natural products and pharma, and really Schedule 3 will allow pharma to begin to develop, into the natural products world. I think it frees up a lot of money, and we need it. I'm a theorist, I'm a researcher. I can do a whole lot with very little money and kind of change the world kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people like me that are kind of just, ready to go, sitting on idle, ready to go do drug development and stuff like that. So I do think it'll take a year or 2 years to
Few
actually
years, probably, yeah.
yeah, to be actually begin to see drugs in the market. But to your point, that changes everything, because now, old pharmacist Joe has to now pick up a PDR and read the news section in the PDR concerning cannabis, right? Which is cool. And that's what we
And
want.
has to set away a lot of those stigmatized views. Now, I will say, I think most pharmacists are awake to the fact that marijuana is not the primary driver of social problems in this country. I think that they look at their patients or customers, or whatever you want to say, who, especially through the late 2000s, were bringing in script after script after script of controlled substances, who can't seem to stop their other prescriptions. I think pharmacists are pretty awake to this. They just they don't have the training. They
Yeah.
never were told about this. They were told it was just a drug of abuse. So we're making progress. We're moving in that direction already. I think
Well,
this is an accelerant. I think that's what Schedule 3 will be, except for the existing state markets, which it won't accelerate anything. It'll just almost start to, I think it'll just continue as is. But those industries are struggling right now, and I don't think it will spark interest or investment on their side, which
yeah.
is, a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah, I do think it will help growers. I think it'll help growers quite a bit if growers are willing to, adhere to SOPs. Interestingly, I'm friends with the guy that kind of did the curriculum at University of Mississippi and helped him, with that a little bit. But and it's copied over after University of Maryland. But he got so frustrated, and his Dr. David Colby is his name, but he got so frustrated that, he's head of curriculum for the pharmacy department at University of Mississippi. And he got so frustrated that he's minting, all these young, bright PharmD PhDs, and none of them know about the endocannabinoid system. And he's sending them out into a world where, 42 states have some kind of program. So he got frustrated enough to make change, which I really admire him for. And he had to fight through all manner of red tape just to get that program. And it's still not launched yet. It's still not, done, let's say, baked.
Next semester.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah. So it's I think it's accredited now, but he didn't even want to talk about it until it was, accredited. So,
Well, let me share some insight into the UMaryland program. And I believe the dean of pharmacy is now retired. They first upstarted the program or pitched it in 2018 or something to that effect. It was set to go live, and sort of after the approval, but before the go live, the state district attorney, not district attorney, the bigger one, the state, what am I thinking of?
Attorney General.
Attorney General, there it is, came to the dean and said, hey, if you teach about cultivation, if you teach about business, if you deviate outside of the lines we've drawn for you, if you color outside of these lines, I'm going to have your license and you're going to be, political fodder. And so don't. So we were very strictly put into this therapeutics and medicine only box. and were very, like, quite literally, the dean was threatened by the state representative to not go down this lane and don't lose our federal money. And that's their concern, right? Is like, okay, the state has approved this, but the feds think it's illegal, so be careful because the federal money might get cut off. And you know what that would do to a state. I mean, it decimates the state because we're so dependent on the flow of federal money. So I think we're in a weird spot. I think Schedule 3 helps, but it doesn't resolve it. Schedule 3 doesn't change what the feds say to Maryland in that case. Schedule 3 is still a controlled substance. You know, these state license programs don't have the right framework, DEA registrant, et cetera. So there's going to continue to be problems with Schedule 3, but there is also this benefit of when we take it out of Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and if we move it to Schedule 3, there's different in tax code enforcement, for specifically 280E, which is literally bleeding the industry dry right now. And so if that holds true, I do see Schedule 3 as a small but serious win for the state-run programs as well.
Do you see this? And I kind of see this, and I mean this with all due respect, because there's a lot of good people in the industry, but I kind of see that, there's kind of a war against the true medical, kind of people, let's say, in the industry, the people who really view this as a medicine and kind of want to develop it as a medicine. Yeah, we still have fun with it, but yeah, we want to kind of go medical. And then I won't name any companies, but let's say the yeehaw crowd, the crowd that really just is about, this is a liquor store thing to them. And to me, I kind of see that being promoted. Like if you look at Michigan, so again, if I can make this a liquor store thing, then I'm gonna kind of wreck the medical aspects of this. And if I can get you to see it as a liquor store thing and not a medical thing, then maybe that serves some people. Let's just say,
well, it makes money, especially for big companies. I think that multi-state operators and large companies are very interested in turning this into a consumer packaged good, participating in price compression and trying to really get this into a lot of avenues. And look, there's money to be made, but there's a lot of, I think, in between. Like, I don't think there's a war. I think there's a swirling of all these worlds, and everyone's trying to figure out what works best for them, because that's what it is. I just think we need to all agree that we can harmonize, that we can all be working in concert. Pharma can have their piece, and they can go through pharmacies and they can develop their medicines, and everyone can do that. Whilst we can also have like healthcare professionals available for people who want to just use botanical herbal cannabis. And then we can have recreational, we can do all those things, but we need to work together instead of working apart. I don't know that there's a war, but there is disagreement, right? Like, I talk about adverse side effects of cannabis actually pretty regularly. It's not a perfect medicine. In fact, it's a bit riddled with side effects. Anxiety, paranoia, tachycardia, dry mouth, dry eyes, feeling sleepy, feeling a little amotivational or lazy. All are known unavoidable side effects that, with education, with modulation of the cannabinoid medicine that we're using, we can tinker with. But, to ignore that, nope, weed's perfect, it makes me feel fine, it makes my day every day, and to stomp my feet like you're wrong because you're mentioning this very documented thing. I think we need to stop that, which is infighting, is what I would call it. And we need to work more cohesively to try to support the patients who need help, to try to get consumers who just want to smoke some cannabis or get their products at an affordable price. And then, yes, pharma can have their share and their piece in their world. I think those three worlds are the future. There's this sort of pharma medical route, botanical medical route, adult use route. And if we can trifurcate this market and then harmonize and not be fighting against each other, I think that we'll have success.
Wow. Here's your soapbox. That was awesome. Yeehaw. Hurrumph. I like that. So as you kind of look, let's say we expand past the United States, and I've done some writing for the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine. I think you maybe have too. That publication is the only publication that exists for physicians that's a peer-reviewed publication. And I know that he's had trouble like selling that to doctors here in the United States. But yet when he talks to physicians outside the United States, they want it. I mean, they're just hungry for the knowledge. Are you kind of seeing this interesting kind of, where the world might be more of a kind of an open situation than the United States at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a little more well cooked already, as opposed to the rest of the world. We're still figuring out the recipe. What I see mostly with US based physicians, and I work with a lot of different specialties, is they often are wondering, well, how does this relate to me? We've got a lot of specialists in the United States, very much fewer generalists, which is a bit in contrast to compared to much of the world. How does this relate to my practice? And they sort of just want to know that piece, right? So my emergency department physicians, they're worried about, acute toxicity, right? Taking a really big dose, a little kid who gets into 250 milligrams gummies. They're interested in cannabinoid hyperemesis, right? Which is a chronic exposure to THC, which is for whatever reason, whether it's pesticides or whether it's THC itself or whatever reason, genetics, they're developing a hyperemesis syndrome. I see it with some regularity in the hospital. Like ED docs want to know that, but they don't want to hear about the anti-inflammatory or some of the other effects. And you see this across most specialties. So I think if you look to the rest of the world, you see a much more broader vision, because doctors will be less restricted on, oh, just stay in your lane or you're only this specialist. So I think that that's probably why we see a little more openness throughout the world, because the way the US system is fragmented, it's just not conducive to expanding general knowledge among specialists.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting observation. I hadn't really thought about that way. I just sort of took it as kind of either, lack of education, kind of lack of knowledge, but not so much, gosh, I'm so specialized and how does it, apply to my specialty? So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
cool.
the physicians I talk to are pretty open-minded. Very rarely do I meet a physician who's got a strong negative stance on cannabis medicine. Now, granted, I work in Southern California, so I'm sure if I went back to the right part of the country,
Yeah, here,
but
here in Oklahoma, it's a little different.
yeah, but I think generally they're just like, well, what am I going to do with this information? Right? Like tell me what I need to know, which is a very common position for any physician because they're busy and they're not reimbursed enough and they're, overworked and yada, yada, yada. So I think tailoring that education, that was the capstone of my master's program is we made a GI specific presentation and presented it to the physicians at the hospital, trying to get them educated on the ECS, but also cannabis as medicine, the risks, the harms, the benefits, the patients you should be thinking about, et cetera.
Did you look at hyperemesis is an interesting thing, and then we'll talk about pediatrics here in a second. But hyperemesis is an interesting thing that to me, I got asked about that by University of Mississippi, and so I looked at it, and pesticides was the obvious initial thing, but limonene is a really interesting thing, and I haven't researched it enough lately to look at edible, versus smoked and kind of outcomes and all that. But limonene's a serotonin effector, and serotonin is, what makes you vomit. So that seems to me to be kind of an obvious thing, but I don't think anybody's looking at that yet. But
we'll also note that limonene is one of the primary ingredients in cleaners, Pine Sol, and all of these other. Now, look, cannabinoid hyperemesis has a special place in my heart. So first and foremost, I live in Southern California. I see children who've developed a hyperemesis vomiting, right? So this suggests that, okay, if it's happening to kids, kids smoke weed, then it's definitely happening to adults out there because adults definitely, consume even more than children. There's a lot of disagreement. I think this is one of those things where I'm like, we need to harmonize instead of fighting against each other. Because the medical establishment generally agrees that this is associated with chronic use of THC. Not sure what's in that high THC cannabis product or plant, but we know it's associated, like undeniably, with the consumption of high THC cannabis. The condition, CHS, cannabinoid hyperemesis, is associated with repeated cycles of intense vomiting that doesn't respond to any of the medicines we normally give you. So normally when you're vomiting, I give you a serotonin blocker called Zofran, and that makes you feel better. But actually, Chip, they don't respond to Zofran.
So it's
They're
not a
highly
serotonin thing. Okay.
well, it's if THC acts on the master regulatory system, which touches dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and so many other things, then it could be partially serotonin, but not just serotonin. We definitely see that. Um, Relapse remitting cycles of vomiting that tend to get worse over time. They can last a few hours to few days, even a couple weeks at times, which can be life threatening. If you cannot eat and just are vomiting for multiple weeks, put your life at risk. So there have been 2 case reports of patients who died, not from THC ingestion per se, but from the condition they developed while ingesting high THC cannabis over a long period of time. 2 people have passed away so far in the literature. I'm sure there's probably more, but published. Anyway, we don't know whether it's the contaminants in the high THC cannabis or the high THC cannabis itself. But the point is, this is happening. It's happening at an increased frequency compared to pre-legalization days. And we've got multiple studies showing this in different states. And we need to figure out why. But instead of screaming, it's pesticides, it's this evil stuff, you're wrong, it can't be THC, we should all just be interested in finding a solution, because we've got patients who are not doing well. And if we can get ahead of this, if we can understand who's developing this, why are they developing it, what can we do to prevent it, what strategies can we take to mitigate this risk, it'll be better for the industry in the long run. It'll be more open. Everyone's going to understand that this is a potential side effect. Side effects of a drug don't mean that humans aren't going to use it. It's not going to be an industry. Look at alcohol. Killing so many people, getting how many people addicted? 3 million alcohol-related deaths globally every year. People still drink. But we shouldn't be hiding from the fact that it can affect babies. We shouldn't be hiding from the fact that it can affect your driving. So if we want adult use cannabis, we just need to be open-minded to that. But the pendulum of prohibition has swung so far, hard, right, and left, that people really don't want to just sit with the fact and be okay with the fact that cannabis is not perfect. But it's certainly a hell of a lot better than alcohol and all the other drugs we're allowed to buy openly, like tobacco.
I've got a friend, he's likely watching this on Facebook, and he's a quadruple bypass guy, and he's a big cannabis advocate, big cannabis activist. And he has his triple bypass, and it was right about the time when that report came out, or the report came out about heart issues. And THC will cause elevated, it's going to elevate your blood pressure, it's going to elevate your heart rate, so that's just a thing that does happen. But there's also kind of a lot of reefer madness around that too. So
and those headlines are trash. And if you look at the data, it's not nearly what the headline suggests. But you have to go in and tease apart and understand. But there is an increase in cardiovascular risk with chronic cannabis consumption. But why? There's so many questions. So one historical suggestion has been tobacco use. Whether you believe it or not, statistics show that you're 5 times more likely to smoke cigarettes or use nicotine if you're a THC user. We don't fully understand why. It's probably the cross connection between the endocannabinoid system and the nicotinic receptors. We don't fully understand it, but statistically that's likely. That's why historically we've been like, oh, it's probably just the cigarette smoking. But these studies that you're actually referring to were trying to separate out cannabis and tobacco. And when they looked at cannabis only people, they still saw this increased risk. We still don't know why. It doesn't mean that cannabis is assuredly the problem. There's always confounding factors. But to ignore the fact that cannabis increases the risk of tachyarrhythmia, which is true, that you're inhaling smoke, right, which we know has negative adverse effects on the body. And THC is vasoactive. It does change blood pressure. It's not only higher and lower, it's kind of mixed, and depends on how much you smoke and everything. So it's really mixed effects on the blood vessels. Lastly, we know that there are cannabinoid receptors on the nervous cells in our heart. And the nervous cells are where the electrical conductivity sends our heart into beating. So taking a large dose, or taking it while dehydrated, or having wrong electrolytes or whatever, could exacerbate other issues. And we know this. Instead of, again, denying it, let's talk about responsible use.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't take dabs all day long for many years. That would be reasonable if we were talking about liquor. No one would even question it. It'd be like, oh, well, you have been hitting a bottle a day for a while. Maybe there's negative effects. I think we just need to step back, try to bring a sense of poison rationality to the conversations that we're having, and legalize cannabis, de-schedule cannabis, because it is not as harmful as all these other substances.
Yeah, yeah. My friend, what he ended up doing, and he's a dabber, so he was going to dab no matter what. And he goes, "Well, what can I do? How do I know if it's safe or not? Just have my quadruple bypass. I'm all worried." I go, "Well, what does your heart rate get up to when they're stressing your heart?" So he gives me that number, and I said, "Well, okay, dab, and let's take your blood pressure, let's take your heart rate right after you dab, and let's kind of look at that." So he was well below his, let's say, max heart rate or what they were looking at. So, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you anything, but that's, likely safer than it being higher than that. But, we need to experience, we need to have somebody needs to write a grant around that, let's say, or, something around that to kind of begin to find that line, that safety line, because we know it's like you're saying. I mean, we know that THC has bad properties under certain circumstances, and we know it's also really good under certain circumstances, like anything. But we need to be real about that. We don't need to deny that like we tend to do in woohoo land, right?
And develop real strategies to mitigate it. Maybe that means a CBG rich variety with some THC, and you, Chip, or you, the patient, whomever you are, can get the same benefits. But for so long, because of prohibition, the same reason these conversations are happening, we don't have these varieties developed and the genetics formed up, and education to the masses around how we can use cannabinoid ratios and other minor cannabinoids in meaningful ways to get the benefits we want and mitigate the side effects. That's where we need to go as an industry. Is we have a big critique of big pharma, which is fine. They deserve it. They've done some scummy things, and opioid epidemic. There are lots of reasons to be distrustful and angry at pharmaceutical companies. However, we also have a cannabis industry that is hyper-focused on making one molecule. They're trying to crank out lab reports that say that molecule is at 40% of dry weight of a plant. They're literally extracting THC isolate, which is a drug, right? And then sprinkling it into all of the herb how are we going to criticize pharmaceutical companies and then copy their game?
Exactly.
It's nonsense.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's all these guys making D8. I mean, how are you going to criticize pharma? You're doing the same thing.
That's even worse than isolates. It's taking an isolate and producing novel drugs. When you make delta-8 THC from CBD, you are creating substances and drugs that have never been tested in humans before. You are creating a small amount of so many different things that is not being regulatorily, sort of navigated. No one's watching what people are making, nor testing the products that people are ingesting. And I vape because that's typically these products, but not necessarily. We do know that the FDA is kind of concerned about this. And not that, again, they're the perfect org, but there's been a lot of red flags waved. A lot of countries around the world, a lot of states throughout the country are banning these substances, because when you're talking about delta-8 THC, you're not talking about a molecule that was beautifully folded by a plant consistently into the same shape. Instead, you're mixing this chemical with this chemical, and you get this slew of different chemicals. And no one is saying how to clean that up. No one is monitoring to see what the adverse effects of some of those smaller, less produced molecules are. So we don't have a natural product anymore. Right? That's not hemp. That's a drug. Someone made a drug.
And wouldn't you agree that that should be subject to the exact same rigors that, you have to go through in drug development with the FDA, clinical trials and the whole thing? And we're just willy-nilly making these things and putting them out into the marketplace, which is insane. We have Codi, our big Dr. Codi.
Yeah, you're good. I go by Codi.
but the biggest producer and this is in the regulated marijuana market in Oklahoma, the largest producer, the guy that produces more edibles and all kinds of stuff in the market, is not using Delta 9 from a plant. he is taking CBD distillate and flipping that through an acidic process
Mhm.
to D8 and D9 and using that in all
And
these
D7 and DA6A, 10A, and ISO, THC, and all
products.
these other things.
He
Because
has a
there's no
PhD. He has
clean way to make Delta 8 from CBD.
no, and he's got a PhD doing it for him, but I don't know that there's no testing. There's no testing for residual acids here in our market, so I just, I steer clear of those products myself.
So my current, and I did a talk. We were just at MJ Unpacked. They had a really great conference, and people were very receptive to what my talk was on. The words we're using to describe these cannabinoids, both where is it from? Because you can say phytocannabinoid and be talking about delta 9 THC, but delta 9 THC can be made in a laboratory. So we need a little clearer language. I'm not going to get into the talk right now, but the point is on the end of that talk, I said something that seems to have resonated with people, and I still stand by it. We need to regulate plants like plants. Deschedule the marijuana plant. The plant is a plant, and it should not be regulated like a drug. But when we're talking about Delta 8, which doesn't get made by a plant, gets made by a human, usually a man, we're talking about a drug. And so we need to regulate plants like plants and drugs like drugs. And if we can't, but marijuana is a drug. No, it's not. It is an herb. It is a dried plant. It is all these things, right? But when you start extracting stuff and from the plant, that's still from a plant. But if you manipulate that, you're making a new novel drug. And now you really should be beholden that, because the truth is, when you get to the nitty gritty of drugs, there's some really bad stuff that can happen with just a little tinkering. Some very dangerous things have happened in drug development when we get the wrong hand of the same molecule. And so it is very important that we start regulating drugs like drugs. Meanwhile, we should stop treating marijuana like a drug and cannabis like a drug, and instead treat it like a plant. If we could do that, we'd make so much progress globally so quickly. It's kind of wild.
I agree, dude. I'm equally passionate about that. So I want to, it's amazing how fast time flies because this has gone really fast. But I want to compliment you on, and you guys out there may or may not know this, but, Dr. Codi is not, when he talks about marijuana, he is outside of his professional scope. And when he does that, he literally puts his license, somewhat in jeopardy. I mean, there are other people doing that. I don't think that's going to happen, but he's stepping out on a limb that's scary. And should be scary, for medical professionals. And thank God some of them do, but he's very brave to do what he does. And he's very brave to, recommend things to you, because again, that gets into professional status and professional licensing. So Codi, I thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you post. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your vive here, because it's needed, and you're doing such a good job. So thank you.
Thank you, Chip. That was really genuine compliment. I don't have all the answers. I'm not the only one. We need a whole army of people, and we need consumers to work with healthcare professionals, to work with pharma, to work with regulators, to make a cohesive unit. But it's true. I'm out of the green closet, and I'm tired of hiding from the fact that cannabis is medicine. We're literally on the precipice of that decision if Health and Human Services makes this change. And I'm not going to pretend that, I don't consume it. I've been consuming this plant since I was a late in my teens, and it has helped me tremendously. It's also hindered me on occasion. I made some, I maybe got a little lazy or whatever, but I'm tired of hiding from all of those facts. I'm ready for the world to have these conversations. And once again, at least here in Southern California, you talk to physicians, you talk to healthcare professionals, on their personal lives, the stigma is falling very quickly. They know people, they've tried it, that it's so. I can tell you that, a lot of the progress does at least start in the coast, sort of as a wave does. The change is coming, and we need to be as informed and as cohesive as we can. Healthcare professionals, self-trained individuals, extractors, we should all be working together to do things that are sensible, things that are safe, and things that can help people feel better.
Cool. Great words. How can we find you, Cody? So how can we find you if we want to find out what you're doing or get more information about you? I know we can find you on LinkedIn, but
Yeah,
how?
certainly that's where like I spend most of my time. But if you're on Instagram, if you play the meta game, you can find me there at Cannabis Farm D. This lovely link at the bottom. This is canigma.com. So one of my primary roles is serving as the chief science officer there. And what we're trying to do is break down these complex topics into words that are very approachable and Googleable. And so we answer a lot of people's questions about cannabis on the Canigma. So that's one great place. My email is codi@canigma.com. So if you want to reach out to me personally, that'd be A-OK. And then, like I said, yeah, on Meta, on Instagram, I'm at Cannabis Farm D. So that's my favorite herb, followed by my degree, at least my first one. And yeah, it takes a village, and I appreciate what you're doing here, Chip, talking about, health, science, education, and trying to blend these worlds, and not just for, this subsection of piece, it's for everybody. We
Mhm.
need everybody getting on the same page, and I think that's what'll move us forward.
Cool, Cody. Well, it's been such an honor to have you. So thank you for doing this. We'll have you back. So I got a few people I want to run through, but we'll have you back. So thank you again for being here today.
You got it, dude. We'll catch you next week or next time, excuse me.
All righty.
All
See
right.
you later.